Hello everyone, I am Scientier, and welcome to my Guild Wars 1 skill review project video for the Spear Mastery attribute line in the Paragon profession. So Spear Mastery is, as you'd expect, for use with spears. I believe all of these skills are spear attacks and none of them are generic ranged attacks, because that would be weird, looking at the strange random melee attacks in Scythe Mastery. I'm just scanning through to make sure that is accurate. So the spear is a ranged weapon, and it distinguishes itself from the bow, also a ranged weapon with attack skills, by doing things a little bit differently. It can inflict deep wound, and in fact, that's one of my complaints about the spear. Might seem a little weird, but I'll explain myself in just a moment. It can also inflict bleeding pretty reliably. You can see that with Barbed Spear. Which, traditionally speaking, the bow has been bad at, although they've added skills over the years that have kind of made it much more capable at inflicting bleeding. I'm not entirely sure what I think about that. I feel like it kind of means that the bow loses a little bit of its distinguishing characteristics, but on the other hand, bleeding is a unexciting enough condition that I don't mind, per se. And it kind of fits with the ranger being good at inflicting conditions in general. But I kind of wish bow had just, in general, not been good at inflicting bleeding, just because it would have given it a little bit more of its own space, if that makes sense. But anyway, Barbed Spear means that Paragon's very good at inflicting bleeding, or can be quite capable of it. There's a lot of deep wound inflicting skills, but it's bad at countering things, or interrupting things, because it only has Disrupting Throw, which is very conditional. And in general, conditional is a really good way of describing spear attacks. And this brings me to one of my complaints. There are, and we will see this, quite a few skills that inflict deep wound, but none of them do so without a condition. Merciless Spear is one of them, that requires the foe to be below 50% health. Slayer's Spear requires them to have more health than you. Let's see. Vicious Attack requires you to land a critical hit. I think there's also Cruel Spear, which requires them to not be moving. So, Spear has a couple of issues, one of which I've already indicated, which is that a lot of the skills are tied up in conditional deep wound, which is a little unexciting. It's like, pick two, maybe not all of these. It also has a weirdly large number of energy requiring skills, although quite a few adrenaline skills too. The biggest issue for me, frankly, with Spear is that it's just a little underwhelming on a lot of its attack skills. That makes them very uninteresting to me. It's very clear, I think, from some of the numbers, that Spear overall was designed less as an attacking weapon, as more of a ranged tool for gaining adrenaline to fuel some of your other shouts and chants and stuff. Paragon is trying to play this awkward place where it's trying to fit into sort of a party support role, but not too good, and kind of an attack role, but not too good, where it's kind of not exactly amazing at either, except it has some stuff that's really good in the support stuff. I don't know. It's just kind of an awkward professional around. I went over some of the reasons why in the introduction, so if you want more on that, you can go there. But anyway, Spear is it's a okay weapon, but its biggest problem is its lack of an AoE option. It doesn't have a real AoE option. I need a caveat with Holy Spear here. We'll talk about that. It only AoEs if you hit a summoned creature, so that makes it very narrow. It's not general purpose AoE, and the lack of an AoE option is a huge detriment. Bow has AoE option. Basically, every other weapon has AoE options. There's Death Blossom, there's Barrage for daggers, there's Barrage and Volley for bows, there's Whirling Attack for melee attacks in general if you want to go slash warrior or be a warrior. Scythe is automatically AoE, just by its very nature, but it also has Armides Attack, and a bunch of its skills have AoE properties. Hammers have Crude Swing, Axe has Cyclone Axe and Triple Chop, Sword has 100 Blades, but it's also technically a little bit lacking, but Whirling Attack kind of gets around that. So all of the other sort of weapons have AoE options. Spear really doesn't, and that's a huge downside for it. So it's really important to acknowledge that and to be aware of that. So with all of that said, Spear can do some fun stuff. Let's go ahead and get into it. Starting talking about spear skills with Barbed Spear. So Barbed Spear is 2 adrenaline. It's a spear attack, and if it hits, it inflicts bleeding for 17 seconds. This is probably the cheapest bleed-inflicting skill in the game in terms of no recharge, 2 adrenaline, every other attack can inflict bleed. If you want to inflict a lot of bleed, this is a really good way of going about it, but I don't usually use this skill very much. There's a couple of reasons why, and that's because of a very hidden downside that this skill has. Whenever you use an adrenaline skill, it drains 1 strike of adrenaline from all of your adrenaline skills. If it's an attack, then when it hits, it will recharge that strike of adrenaline to all of your skills, but it makes them adrenaline neutral at best. That means that Barbed Spear really slows down the rate of adrenaline gain if you're spamming it, so you actually don't want to use it every time you can. Also, bleed tends to be a little underwhelming. I don't necessarily want to put a skill on single target bleed like this, although in terms of single target bleed skills, this is maybe a little bit of a better option. But I tend to find bleed inflicting stuff by themselves a little underwhelming. And the hidden downside of if you spam this, you're actually really slowing down your adrenaline gain rates is actually a pretty big downside. So it's the 2 adrenaline cost is a little bit of a misnomer on this skill. So I just don't like it that much. I feel like this is kind of I'm going to give this a generous 3. It's kind of almost a 2 for me because I feel like I don't really want this unless I'm wanting to be inflicting bleeding, but it's a pretty long bleed. It's a very low cost, and it's a great way of being able to reliably trigger a bunch of the anthems that Paragon has, and that gives it a little bit more value just from that standpoint, just from the standpoint of, hey, Paragon has a bunch of skills that trigger off of using attack skills. Barbed Spear is really good at triggering those. Maybe gets a little bit of value because of that. That brings us to Blazing Spear. The other thing, too, actually, is Paragon has a number of other attacks that require enemies to be conditioned. This is a good way of doing it, but Blazing Spear is kind of my preferred way. So Blazing Spear is 6 adrenaline. It's a spear attack. If it hits, it deals plus 21 damage and sets the target on fire for 3 seconds. This is one of the higher damaging skills, and burning can be applied to more foes than bleeding can. The exception, of course, is destroyers. Do not bring the skill against destroyers because they can't be set on fire. A really important consideration. But I'm going to give this one a 4. I like this one a lot, and if I'm bringing a skill, often this is going to be the one spear attack that I'm bringing. The only other one that I will consider bringing is actually down here. It's Wild Throw because it's stance removal. We'll get into that when we get to it, but Blazing Spear I like quite a lot. I like it for setting up the condition for some of my other options, Stunning Strike and the PvE only skill way down here, Spear of Fury. We'll talk about this later. This is an absurd skill. My goodness, those numbers are ludicrous. So I like it for setting up those in a very reliable way and in a way where, except for destroyers, it will work, right? So good damage, useful condition, all around a very useful spear attack. Okay, so, oh yeah, I forgot about this one. So that brings us to the next one, which is Chest Thumper. This is 5 energy, 5-second recharge, spear attack. If it hits a foe with cracked armor, that foe suffers a deep wound for 17 seconds. So this is one of the 5 conditional deep wound skills, and is not my favorite. My favorite, we will talk about it, is Merciless Spear, because its condition is very easy. But Chest Thumper, it does nothing but conditionally inflict deep wounds. I have other options for conditionally inflicting deep wounds that I like better. You cannot just conditionally inflict deep wound for me to like you. It's also an energy skill. Cracked armor is not a condition that Paragon can inflict. I have to get it from someone else. That's fine, that's doable, that's something I can do, but I mean... I hope I've expressed my feelings adequately on this skill. Why does this exist? Why? I have many ways of inflicting deep wound in Paragon. Give me something different Give me something useful. Again, it needs to be reiterated. Conditional deep wound. Conditional deep wound. That's all this does, is conditional deep wound. This at least does other effects. Cruel Spear. Conditional deep wound. Yes, it's your elite, but, you know, does more as well. Vicious Attack. More conditional deep wounds. Also, an energy-based one. Slayer Spear. Energy-based conditional deep wounds. Merciless Spear. Like, there are so freaking many conditional deep wounds. Could a couple of these do something else? Please. I'm going to give this a 2, and the only reason I'm not giving it as a 1 is because it is technically a way to inflict deep wound, and deep wound is a good condition. Cracked armor is a condition you can meet, but this is like so close to a 1, everyone. This is a mercy 2 because it technically does a thing, and ugh. It's such a bad skill. I want to give it a 1. But I feel like, you know what? Deep wound is just good enough that I'm going to give this a 2. But it's so bad. It's so bad, guys. It's so bad. Cruel Spear. Cruel Spear is 7 adrenaline, elite spear attack. If this attack hits, you deal plus 25 damage, and if it hits a non-moving target, you inflict a deep wound for 17 seconds. This one is basically a ranged eviscerate. Yes, the target has to not be moving. That's not too bad of a condition to meet. If they're using a skill or something, then you'll meet it. And plus 25 is pretty good plus damage for a spear for some random reason. It's just, spears are often like that 13 to 17 damage range. That's kind of more hammery. So 25 is actually pretty high. I like this one all right. I use it sometimes, but I'm going to give it a 3. It's kind of maybe almost a 4, but it's the elite that's kind of holds it back. Frankly, if I'm making an offensive spear build, Cruel Spear is the skill that I use. That's not a common build for me to make. If I'm bringing a Paragon, which is the main time I use a spear. Although, to be clear, you can use spear on any profession as long as you secondary Paragon. I like that. I like this okay if I'm like doing a spear warrior or something that's trying to be more offensively focused. Or if I'm doing a Paragon that's more offensively focused. I like this, but most of the time when I'm doing something with Paragon, I'm doing more of a support build that's making use of either these Paragon skills or the amount of energy Paragon can produce to fuel other skills. So Paragon tends to be the profession where I'd use Shield of Deflection or Shield of Regeneration as examples. So because it can support the energy cost of those skills that are, frankly, relatively powerful, but monks can't quite afford them very well. So, it's just not very commonly that I'm going on that sort of build. But if I am, Cruel Spear is probably the choice, but it's just uncommonly used. Disrupting Throw, 5 energy, half second activation time. I'm used to interrupts being quarter, but attacks are half. 10 second recharge, spear attack. If this attack hits a foe suffering from a condition, that foe is interrupted. This is the interrupt. It's okay. I'm going to give it a 3. The conditional clause of the enemy suffering from a condition is not too hard to meet, but it is there. I like this better if my party is inflicting conditions in general. I like it less if they're not inflicting conditions in general. But I feel that that's an easy enough condition to meet that I'm okay with giving it an okay score. I'm not bringing a Paragon to interrupt things, or if I am, I'm using Stunning Strike. We'll talk about later. So Disrupting Throw, it's okay. If you want interrupts, though, probably you're better served by going like Mesmer or something like that. It should be added that this does not require any Spear Mastery to use. The only reason it's in Spear Mastery is because it's a spear attack. This is technically a no attribute skill. The second one, that's like a no attribute skill. That's just randomly in an attribute for some reason. We had one in command as well. So technically you could bring this on a secondary Paragon that doesn't have any points put in Spear Mastery but has a spear and can just be like, hey, I want to pull out my spear and throw a Disrupting Throw at you. And it will work if they have a condition. So, it's all right. Harriers Toss. This has a PvP only version for some reason. I think it just makes some of the stats a little bit worse. Harriers toss is 10 energy, half-second activation time, 10-second recharge, spear attack. If this attack hits, you deal plus 17 damage, and if it hits a moving foe, it can be a hard condition to meet. It deals an additional 25 damage. So we saw some Harrier skills in Dervish that also especially inflict stuff against moving foes. This can deal a lot of damage. I think the main thing about this is the quick activation time is good for spiking. So this could be a good follow-up to like Cruel Spear if you want to be like Cruel Spear, Harrier's Toss to inflict a lot of damage suddenly. That's much more of a PvP consideration than it is a PvE one. And as it is, I feel like 10 energy is overcosted for this skill. It's another one of those, like, this is maybe okay, but I'm going to give it a 3 because it's kind of, this is borderline 2 or 3 territory. I feel that the effect is probably good enough that it kind of gets a little bit of a bump, but this is not a skill that I commonly bring when I'm going Spear, and it's very expensive at 10 energy, so this looks a bit more attractive on, like, a Ranger, for example, that can decrease the cost of the skill through expertise. So if for some random reason you're running a Spear Ranger, Harrier's Toss looks okay, but the main reason to do that, by the way, is Spears do have a quicker attack speed than bows. Just something to keep in mind. Holy Spear. Holy Spear is 4 adrenaline. It is a spear attack. If it hits, it deals plus 17 damage. If it hits a summoned creature, all nearby foes take 75 holy damage and are set on fire for 3 seconds. This one, I like this one okay. I'm going to give this one a 4. This is a usage 4, not a strength 4, to be clear. Because I want to differentiate it from all the 3s that I'm probably going to give a lot of the spear attacks. I like this one reasonably well. The adrenaline cost is relatively low at only 4. Plus 17 damage isn't a standout. The bonus effect is useful against both spirits and minions. So if you're going into, say, Cantha, this becomes attractive. There's a lot of, not so much in the Echovold Forest, but in the Jade Sea and in Kaineng, areas where you're fighting the Afflicted, there's going to be a lot of spirits. And this is quite effective against those. Remember, spirits are immune to every condition except burning, so setting them on fire is also very useful. And the holy damage will deal double damage to undead, so it's also very good against summoned creatures. So if you're going into an area where there's going to be a lot of minions, this is especially good. But just in general, it's like okay, not exciting, but it's okay. It's the sort of effect that I appreciate existing, though. It's a really neat and nice way of making a counter for summon stuff, and I like that. And nearby includes the summoned creature you hit, to be clear, and this does a lot of damage if you hit summoned creatures, so very good counter to them. It's very specific areas where they get spammed a lot, and minion masters are not something that the AI does commonly in an effective way because it requires corpses, so it tends to be something your party's better at. And if the AI is getting a lot of minions, you might want to consider stuff to specifically kind of counter that. And there's not really many AI minion master type builds, so something to be kind of aware of. Anyway, that brings us to Maiming Spear. This is 5 energy, 5-second recharge, spear attack. If your attack hits a bleeding foe, that foe is crippled for 17 seconds. I feel like this is made to go with Barbed Spear, although technically it works with any bleeding enemy. Why is it so narrow as bleed? That's a real question. Is it just because Spear is supposed to be bad at inflicting crippled? To differentiate it from Bow, which is okay at inflicting crippled? Like, it has Pin Down, which is very expensive. And it has Crippling Shot, which is strong elite, and it has some other skills that can inflict crippled. But like, I think of Bow as being good at inflicting crippled, but it's not. It's based on a few skills, not a lot of skills. Maiming Spear is very clunky. The fact that it requires bleed and not any condition is a huge downside, although understandable because otherwise it would trigger off of crippled. Although they could just make it if this attack hits a foe that's suffering from a condition other than crippled, then it inflicts crippled. So that could have been done. I'm going to give this a 2. It's a very quick recharging cripple infliction skill, which might be relatively good, but the fact that it requires bleeding is such a narrow clause. And again, there's a lot of foes that are immune to bleeding. I know I say that a lot. It's something that comes up enough that it matters, but it's not completely everywhere. I basically never use this skill, though. It's just a very, very narrow way of inflicting crippled. And if I'm wanting to inflict crippled, I'm usually looking for other things. But I could see considering it if you're on some sort of team that's spamming bleed around. It's not something that comes up much, but if you are, then this maybe becomes a little bit more attractive. But honestly, if I'm wanting to inflict crippled, I think I'd prefer to bring Crippling Anthem in command or other skills to do it. Again, one of the problems I have with Spear is that there's just a lot of conditionality in it, where it's just like, under these conditions, you can do a thing, and then it does just that thing, so it's very underwhelming to me. Merciless Spear is 6 Adrenaline, Spear attack. If this attack hits a foe with less than 50% health, that foe suffers from a deep wound for 17 seconds. So this is my preferred method of inflicting deep wound conditionally with Spear, with the caveat that Cruel Spear is a preferred... Like, I'm not going to bring this and Cruel Spear. Like, I'm basically only ever going to bring one conditional deep wound inflicting skill. And if it's going to be Cruel Spear, that's an offensive move, but where I want that. And I'm not going to bring Merciless Spear in that case, but Merciless Spear gets used much more often, just because I'm going to more often be in the case where I'm using some other elite, and I'm very happy to bring this skill. This, like... below 50% health is a very fine time to be inflicting deep wound. Like, I'm happy to inflict a deep wound then. So, I'm going to give this guy a 4. More, again, for use than power, just to differentiate it some. I'm doing that more here. I don't know if I should have done that more in other professions, but... So, I like this one reasonably well as a way of inflicting deep wounds. This is the most reliable condition to hit, I feel. And I generally prefer to focus my Paragon attack skills on adrenaline skills, because most of the time my energy is going to other effects. So that's the other big thing, is you have to be very conscious about where you're putting your energy as Paragon. And a lot of the time I'm going to want to put it in secondary profession skills or things like that, rather than my attack skills. So it's just how it goes. Mighty Throw. Okay, so this is something Unblockable Throw is a variant on. Okay, 2 Adrenaline, 3-second activation time. This one also has a 3-second activation time. I wish we did not have 2 skills that did this, but here we are. Mighty Throw is a spear attack. Your spear moves 3 times faster. If it hits, you deal plus 34 damage. Oh my goodness. I don't even know. Like, 3-second activation time is so long for an attack. The windup on this is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. This is technically a way of getting some additional damage in, but keep in mind you are tanking your attack rate by using this skill. You can use it every other attack, but you are attacking much slower, and that's going to make you deal less damage as a result. The quicker movement speed is useful for reducing the instances of dodging and missing and stuff like that, where it strays from its target or things like that. I'm pretty sure spears can be afflicted by that just as well as bows can. I think any ranged attack can. And so moving faster helps with that. But 3-second activation times are way too long. This skill is so clunky to use. You're not doing anything while you're waiting for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is so long in this game. I don't like this skill at all. I am going to give it a 2 because it is technically a lot of damage, but I don't like it very much at all. If I haven't made that abundantly clear. Man, 3-second activations are just... ugh. Okay, Slayer's Spear. 10 energy, 4-second recharge, spear attack. If this attack hits, you deal plus 21 damage. If that foe has more health than you, that foe suffers from a deep wound for 17 seconds. I don't like this one very much. The damage is good. The condition for the deep wound is awkward. The energy cost is astronomical. I don't want to be using attack skills that much energy cost on Paragon. It's just way too much. I might consider using this skill on, I've said it before, but a Spear Ranger. where the energy cost is mitigated by expertise. At that point, this becomes mildly acceptable, but even then, it's kind of pricey. I don't like this skill very much as a result. I have better ways of getting additional damage. I have other ways that I like for inflicting deep wounds. I wish that this skill didn't exist and was a different skill that was better or more interesting. I don't need yet another conditional deep wound skill. This clause is very awkward to make use of. So I don't like it. I don't like this skill at all. I'm going to give it a 2. Because I think it could be okay in that ranger case. I think it could be... like, it does do stuff. It's just very expensive, and I'm not a big fan of it as a result. I guess I don't really have much more to say about it than that. Yeah. I just shake my head. Again, the problem with Spear. It's just not terribly exciting. A lot of its skills are very conditional or otherwise kind of clunky and things like that. Spear of Lightning is 5 energy, 6-second recharge, spear attack. If this attack hits, it deals plus 18 lightning damage, and it has 25% armor penetration. For some reason, it is harkening back to air magic, the randomist thing. Randomist, whatever. This deals decent damage. The lightning damage change is okay. This makes it hit warriors and stuff harder, but otherwise doesn't matter that much. It's more of a flavor thing. Mostly it's that this skill does plus 18 damage and has armor penetration. This does pretty good damage. I don't tend to bring it because, again, it costs energy, and I'd rather be spending my energy on other things. But if you're going for damage, this one's a pretty reasonable option. The armor penetration does add a good bit to the base damage of this attack, and plus 18 is a little bit on the higher end of what spears get. So I like this one okay. I'm going to give this one a 3. Again, I don't use it very often, but it's all right. Spear of Redemption. This is 3 adrenaline, spear attack. If this attack hits, you deal plus 17 damage. If it fails to hit, you lose 1 condition. This one's interesting. It allows you to be able to get rid of like blind, stuff like that if it fails to hit. But it sounds really nice until you realize you have to somehow build up to 3 adrenaline while blind in order to be able to make use of this skill. And at that point, it suddenly becomes a lot less attractive. There are ways around that. For example, to the limit. The Warrior Tactics Shout gains you adrenaline. And there's also the Make Your Time shout in Leadership that gains you adrenaline based on allies. That can fuel this up, but... the main reason to bring this is not for the if it fails to hit, you lose 1 condition clause, although you can intentionally do that by trying to get obstacles between you and the target. So they're obstructed or against blocking foes and stuff like that. You want to get rid of some conditions. Very clunky way to try to get rid of conditions, though. You're bringing this because it's 3 adrenaline for plus 17 damage. It stacks up relatively favorably against Holy Spear in that regard, although I feel like Holy Spear's upside is marginally better than Spear of Redemption. Spear of Redemption is like an okay skill. I'm going to give it a 3 just because I don't tend to bring it as much as Holy Spear, but I think it's fine. That's kind of where we are. Stunning Strike. Stunning Strike is 10 adrenaline. It is an elite spear attack. If this attack hits, you deal plus 25 damage. If it hits a foe suffering from a condition, that foe is also dazed for 9 seconds. Notably, this skill works fabulously well on a player Paragon with Spear of Fury, which gains you a ton of adrenaline, and if against foes that are conditioned. And so you can keep Stunning Strike up kind of indefinitely with that. So Stunning Strike is a very strong way of inflicting dazed. I will say that build works better on a player Paragon because of the power of Spear of Fury. We'll talk about that in next episode in more detail, but it's okay on on a AI Paragon. But honestly, if I want Daze, I'm going to probably go for Broadhead Arrow because that's an adrenal or an energy attack that can be used right off the bat. So I prefer that rather than having to build up to 10 adrenaline in order to inflict it. So as far as I'm concerned, this is I'm going to give this a 2. It's kind of a clunky way of inflicting Daze. It's very expensive. The power is there, plus 25 damage is good, but if you're not getting dazed from it, it's overpriced by a lot. A lot. It's more of a 6 energy or a 6 adrenaline skill if you're getting plus 25 damage, not 10. That's for the dazed. So you have to be inflicting dazed. And there are other ways to inflict dazed on heroes. But if you are playing a Paragon, I like this skill a bit more with Spear of Fury. And actually, if you go back and look at the VOD of Consciousness videos, kind of towards the middle end, where I played on this Paragon a lot, I did do Stunning Strike Spear of Fury builds quite a bit, and found them to be quite effective at disrupting enemies on a rather continual basis. But in my opinion, that's more of a player thing and not a thing that I could do on the AI, so I'm going to give this a much lower score as a result. Swift Javelin. Swift Javelin is 5 energy, 10-second recharge, spear attack. If this attack hits, you deal plus 17 damage. If you're under the effects of an enchantment, the spear flies twice as fast and cannot be blocked. I don't know why this likes being enchanted when other things in Paragon don't like being enchanted. Paragon is very inconsistent about what it feels about enchantments. This skill is okay with conjures and stuff, but I wouldn't generally bring this. The damage is not as exciting as Spear of Lightning, and the recharge is a bit long. So it's okay with conjures because then they get the twice as fast and can't be blocked clause, but even then they're a little bit long in the recharge. I really wish this skill had a 5-second recharge. That would make it a lot more palatable to me. I think it's okay. I'm gonna give it but I'm gonna give it a 2 because I don't think I'd ever use it in a situation where I'm not using a conjure in order to guarantee that I'm getting those additional effects, or using it in a situation where I'm making sure that I'm enchanted. I'm not going to rely on incidental enchanting for my party for this. It's kind of where I'm coming at. Unblockable throw. So this is Mighty Throw. You'll notice it does the exact same damage. So this is 7 adrenaline, 3-second cast or activation time, spear attack. If it hits, you deal plus 34 damage, but it cannot be blocked. So this is Mighty Throw for 5 more adrenaline in order to make it unblockable. Here's the thing. That's not good enough. I don't like the long activation time to begin with. Not being able to be blocked does not make this appreciably better. And yes, the damage is nice, but so unblockable is one of those clauses where like a bunch of the time it doesn't do anything, so it's just making the skill needlessly more expensive. And then the other part of the time it does do something, but what that does is let you not be blocked once with this attack against an enemy that's blocking, and this is an adrenaline skill. The problem is it's really hard to build adrenaline against enemies that are blocking. Here's the other problem. There's Wild Throw. This attack can also not be blocked. I am going to prefer Wild Throw over Unblockable Throw. I'm going to give this a 2, but keep in mind it's extremely close to a 1, just like Mighty Throw. And I like Mighty Throw marginally better than this, but it's very slim margins, because both of these are very bad. Again, I wish Spear had more interesting skills, but unfortunately a lot of them are conditional, are really bad, or other things, and it's just like, Spear, give me something. And Spear's like, Cruel Throw? Like, anything else? And it's like, not really. So, Spear is just an incredibly underwhelming attribute line, in my opinion, and like a lot of it's just very mediocre. And Unblockable Throw is kind of the bottom of that sort of pile. So, unfortunately, Vicious Attack. Vicious Attack is 5 energy, 8-second recharge, spear attack. If this attack hits, you deal plus 17 damage, like standard. If you land a critical hit with this attack, then your foe, the foe you hit, suffers from a deep wound for 13 seconds. So, this one's okay on... Well, Go for the Eyes makes this much more likely to be a critical hit. And this is okay on Assassin, that can boost critical hit rate as well. I like this okay on Assassin. I don't really like this otherwise. Again, plus 17 damage is not terribly exciting. 8-second recharge is a little bit long for plus damage anyway. It stacks up very poorly against Spear of Lightning in that regard, so I'd rather use Spear of Lightning. I don't usually want to use energy-based spear attacks on Paragon because I want to spend my energy on other skills. I only have so much energy bandwidth. So vicious attack loses a little bit from that, and I don't need yet another conditional deep wound. Critical hit is a very difficult to match condition, made easier because of Go for the Eyes, or made more interesting on an assassin, which can make use of it. I like that sort of synergy aspect of it, but it loses out to Merciless Spear for me a lot of the time, because Merciless Spear is a much more reliable way of inflicting deep wound. As you can see, there are a lot of very conditional skills in Spear Mastery. Vicious attack just doesn't match up, so I'm giving it a 2 as well. And if I look, there's been a lot of 2s in Spear Mastery, with occasional 3s and rare 4s. So I'm just not a huge fan of this. We did not need yet another conditional deep wounds. We really didn't. Oh well, here we are. Wearying Spear. This is 3 adrenaline. Spear attack. If this attack hits, you deal plus 34 damage, and you are weakened for 5 seconds. Why? Why does Spear... Okay, so Spear is divided between, like, conditional deep wound, mediocre attack skills, and other types of mediocre attack skills. Weakening myself for 5 seconds is not worth a 3 adrenaline cost attack that deals plus 34 damage. Yes, that's a lot of damage for Spear, but weakening myself is not worth it. It is awkward. It is obnoxious. I don't want this skill. Spear, why? Weakness decreases all of your attributes by 1, but not below 0, I don't think. And it makes you deal a lot less damage in physical attacks. You are trading damage in physical attacks. For what it's worth, I think this is probably a little bit better than Mighty Throw. Than Mighty Throw. But this is not a good skill either. I'm going to give it a 2. Technically, you can do stuff with it, but like Spear is just full of garbage skills, and I'm frustrated by it. I wish it was a more interesting weapon, but it's just so full of garbage skills, or like weirdly conditional skills that are all competing for the same skill slot because it's all deep wound, or like randomly really narrow stuff like Maiming Spear, or like effects that just aren't that exciting, or low damage. It's just like Spear feels like Smiting Prayers in that it's got like a lot of skills that technically exist, but they all just feel very weak. It's like, clearly you're trying to communicate to me that's not what this profession is about, with a couple of like reasonable to decent skills thrown in just to make me know that it does technically exist and has skills in it. But most of them are just like a sea of like mediocrity to trash. It's just frustrating to me. And I wish Spear had more going for it. But here's where we are. Finally, a Wild Throw. Wild Throw is 7 adrenaline. Spear attack. If this attack hits, it deals plus 17 damage, and any stance being used by your target ends. This attack cannot be blocked, like most stance-ending skills. I think all stance-ending attack skills cannot be blocked. I'm not 100% on that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. All of your non-spear attack skills are disabled for 3 seconds because warriors were abusing this, because you don't have to put any points into Spear Mastery in order to be able to get the stance cancel effect. I kind of wish they'd only done that for PvP, but it doesn't really matter that much. But yeah, basically what happened in PvP is warriors would bring Wild Throw, and they'd bring a spear. So for some history, it used to be that like warriors, or technically dervishes or whatever, would just bring like a wand, a scepter, and just auto attack things, not for damage, but to build adrenaline. And when Paragon came out, they kind of generally switched over to spear. No particular reason. I think spears may or may not have a quicker attack speed than scepters, but I'm not sure on that. I'd have to check. It's not terribly relevant. But what it meant is that they could just bring Wild Throw and just use that to end stances on things at a range with no real downside. So Wild Throw, that's why it has the all of your non-spear attack skills are disabled for 3 seconds line. It's clunky way to kind of patch a hole. That's really what it kind of comes down to. I kind of wish it had been like, 50% chance to miss with Spear Mastery 4 or less or something like that. But it doesn't really matter. They're just trying to patch that hole. That's what that line is about. I like this one okay, but it's not my favorite stance removal skill. This is good in situations where you're not worrying about blocking stances, but the problem is it's really hard to build up the adrenaline if there's blocking stances happening. So this one sees some use from me because it can be useful to kind of just remove stances. I like it okay against like Shiro Tagachi at the end of Factions and Nightfall. Spoilers, I guess, on anybody who doesn't know the story to this, 13-year-old game at this point in time. I'm not trying to be negative there. That may have kind of come out sounding a little bit more sarcastic than I meant it. Sorry about that. But anyway, Wild Throw is not a high choice for removing blocking stances. So I'm gonna give this a 2, just because I feel like it's kind of conditional when I would actually want this. A lot of the time, if I'm just doing damage, like just standard stuff, I'm bringing like Blazing Spear, Holy Spear, and Merciless Spear, or maybe Cruel Spear. This can show up some, but usually it's going to require me to have some stance that I want to remove to actually really consider bringing it. So anyway, that's going to go ahead and wrap stuff up for Spear Mastery. There are just enough no attribute skills I decided to have its own video on that. So we will talk about those next time. I expect it to be a little bit shorter, though, because there's only 5 of those, so 7 skills total. Until then, everyone, take care, and goodbye.